As we celebrate the centennial of the women's right to vote, we are reminded of suffragists throughout history. We will be voting for the first time in the upcoming election, and we are here to tell the story of those who campaigned during the women's suffrage movement, highlighting different moments leading up to the ratification of the 19th Amendment. My name is Ariel Lopez. I'm 18 years old, and this is the story of America's first feminist, Abigail Adams. Abigail Adams was married to the second president of the United States, John Adams, and the mother of the sixth president, John Quincy Adams. Abigail ran her family's farm and finances while her husband was away on business and was the first woman to ever purchase and sell land. She refused to own slaves and paid everyone she hired. Adams was a strong advocate of public education. She believed everyone, including girls, should be given an education. She is best known for her letter to future President John Adams during the Constitutional Convention in 1776. According to the National Archives, Abigail Adams wrote, "I long to hear that you have declared the independency. And by the way, in the new code of laws, which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make, I desire you would remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power into the hands of the husbands. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion, and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation." Thank you, Abigail Adams.
My name is Maria Behrend. I'm a 19-year-old college student at the University of New Mexico, and this is the story of the Seneca Falls Convention. The first gathering devoted to women's rights in the United States was the Seneca Falls Convention, held on July 19th and 20th, 1848 in Seneca Falls, New York. The convention helped frame the national discussion of women's rights in America and launched the women's suffrage movement that would take place over the next 70 years. Over 300 people attended to protest women's lack of rights in their government. At the convention, women wrote the Declaration of Sentiments, a pronouncement describing women's grievances and demands. The Declaration of Sentiments states, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal." The Declaration voices 19 ways the government abused women, including being denied an education, unable to own land, and forced to adhere to laws to which they could not vote for or have any voice in creating. Thank you to the women that organized, supported, and participated in the Seneca Falls Convention.
My name is Sarah Herring, and I'm a student at the University of New Mexico. This is the story of Sojourner Truth. Sojourner Truth is one of the most well-known and powerful abolitionists and women's rights activists. She was born a slave in upstate New York in 1797 and given the name Isabella Baumfree. She remained in slavery for 29 years before she escaped and changed her name. After Truth gained her freedom, she found out the man who enslaved her had illegally sold her son. She became the first black woman to sue a white man and win. She got her son back and his freedom 1 year after her own. Truth and 2 of her children moved to New York, where she began her involvement in the anti-slavery and the women's rights movements. In 1851, Truth delivered one of the most famous abolitionists and women's rights speeches in America, known as "Ain't I a Woman?" In a famous recounting of her speech, she said, "Look at me, look at my arm. I have plowed and planted and gathered into barns, and no man could heed me. And ain't I a woman?" Truth distanced herself from the main suffrage movement after racist remarks were made, but she continued to travel the country and give speeches. Truth paved the way for women's rights for generations. Thank you, Sojourner Truth.
My name is Lucy, and I am a registered voter. This is the story of the 15th Amendment. In 1870, the 15th Amendment was passed, stating that the right of citizens in the U.S. to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the U.S. or any state on the account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Over the next decade, women attempted to vote, saying the new amendment gave them that freedom. Their actions were, however, denied. Susan B. Anthony is one of the most well-known women to have attempted to vote under the 15th Amendment. She was arrested in 1872 and convicted for trying to vote in the presidential election for Ulysses S. Grant. Anthony traveled all over America working on state campaigns, giving 75 to 100 speeches a year in support of the women's suffrage movement. She later became one of the most recognized women's rights activists in American history. In 1874, the Supreme Court decided it was up to individual states to allow women the right to vote. In 1877, a California senator introduced the Women's Suffrage Amendment, which later became known as the Susan B. Anthony Amendment, to Congress. It failed, but it included language that would eventually become the 19th Amendment. Over the next few decades, women held marches, rallies, and fought to get their husbands, fathers, and sons to vote for women. Thank you, Susan B. Anthony, and the women who fought for our right to vote.
Hi, my name is Corbin. I'm a member of the Mayor's Creative Youth Corps. I'm 18 years old, and this is the story of the 19th Amendment. In 1916, Jeannette Rankin became the first woman elected into the House of Representatives. Later that year, President Woodrow Wilson was re-elected, and women continued to picket the White House for suffrage. President Wilson eventually supported women's suffrage, and in September of 1918, he pleaded with the Senate to pass the Women's Suffrage Amendment. In June of 1919, Congress approved it, and the amendment went to states for approval. On February 16, 1920, New Mexico became the 32nd state to ratify the amendment. And then on August 18, 1920, Tennessee became the 36th and final state needed to approve the amendment. That year, on August 26, the 19th Amendment was formally adopted into the Constitution. Thank you to Jeannette Rankin and every supporter of the women's suffrage movement that contributed to the 19th Amendment.
Hello, my name is Stacey Wommack. I'm a student at the University of New Mexico and I'm 21 years old, and this is a story of the fight for universal suffrage. Many women were still unable to vote under the 19th Amendment. Despite Native Americans participating in the women's suffrage movement, they were unable to vote and were not considered citizens. On June 2, 1924, the Indian Citizen Act was signed into law, giving all Native Americans born in the United States citizenship and the right to vote. Still, after the act was passed, Native American men and women continued to face difficulties voting. Poll taxes, literacy tests, and other obstacles were put into place that continued their disenfranchisement. Many minorities were even met with violence at the polls. To this day, people in rural communities and without proper ID continue to have problems voting. In every presidential election since 1980, the proportion of eligible women who voted has exceeded the proportion of eligible men who voted. Generations of Americans have struggled and fought for their right to vote, and now we all benefit from their efforts. Thank you to all the generations that fought for women's suffrage movement.